Do you pedal the same way, no matter what era you are in? Quick test for you. I'm going to play the same short passage of music 3 times using 3 different pedaling styles and see if you can hear the difference. Now, the last one there is fairly terrible for this piece, and actually the first example is the one that actually fits the style the best. But how can you know that? Well, by the end of this video, you should have a better idea of what kind of pedal you should be using for which pieces. First up here, we're going to talk about Romantic era pedaling. Now, this is not only used in the Romantic era, but we're going to start with it because I think it is the one that most people kind of gravitate towards naturally the most. We're going to talk about that one first and then get into more sophisticated ones as the video goes along. When you want things to sound pedaled, you want things to sound smooth in the Romantic era, you often want to change the pedal once per chord. That should at least kind of be your default. So, for example, the first measure is all an E minor chord, and you can just pedal the first measure. Now, there are small nuances if you're an advanced listener, yes, of like maybe you want to clean it up a little bit with some flutter pedal. We're not going to get into that today. Just this is E minor, it works in one pedal. In fact, measure 2, where the melody comes in, the left-hand chord is still kind of the same. It's actually exactly the same. And the melody fits the E minor chord as well, E, G, B. It all fits the same set of 3 notes. You might ask, what about here? And this is where an important distinction kind of needs to be made in your brain between Romantic era pedaling and earlier pedaling. It's okay in lots of Chopin and lots of Brahms and lots of Schumann, lots of Mendelssohn. In the Romantic era, if you're pedaling once per chord, it's okay if your melody blurs together. I'm going to say that again. It is okay if your melody blurs together. Your melody can have steps. And that's fine. In certain eras, as you'll see later in the video, we don't want that sound. We don't want blurred together, but often in the Romantic era, it is okay as long as you're keeping the chord kind of cleaned up. Once again, if you're an advanced pianist, yes, there are times where you need to shake, flutter, half pedal, get rid of some of the sound. But right now, just think one pedal per chord. So for example, keep it down. None of that's offensive to our ears. Now, the downbeat of measure 3 changes to a new chord. And then it changes again here. So I'm going to do it once and pedal over the chord change. You're going to hear how quickly the sound kind of builds up into this terrible mesh kind of below, okay? So I'm going to do bad pedaling here. I'm going to put my foot down and not change at all. All the sounds have now kind of built up at once. It doesn't sound great. It's not clean enough. But again, if the chord is cleaned up, we don't actually mind some overlap in the melody. So for example, measure 4, that's fine. I held the pedal down for those 2 beats. Then I'm going to change here. Change. Now, if you're extremely observant, you might say, well, right, Ryan, Chopin says to pedal at the exact spots that you're telling us to pedal. You're not being creative at all. Well, this isn't always going to be the case. Sometimes the composer won't tell you where to pedal. So for example, in a little bit here, Chopin just stops the pedal for a few measures. Well, is he saying don't pedal for those measures? Or is he saying by this point, you see the pattern, you can figure it out for yourself. There are some pieces where there's no pedal marking. The composer will just say con pedal with pedal. use the pedal, use your brain to figure out where it goes. You have to kind of have this knowledge of, okay, typically in the Romantic era, we are pedaling once per measure, even if there are some clashy notes. Before we leave Romantic era pedaling, I just want to make sure I say this out loud really clearly once. Not every piece should be pedaled once per chord. Every time you play a romantic piece, don't go, well, that's all B flat. Okay, new chord. That piece has staccatos everywhere and rest in there. It should not be pedaled like that. I feel like I just need to say that really clearly so no one says, like, I heard from a YouTuber that you should always put your pedal down once per chord, no matter what, from the 1800 to the year 1900. It's not what I'm saying. If the piece calls for pedal, this is your advice on how to pedal it. Now, we have spent some time with Chopin, one of the greatest melodic composers of the Romantic era, and now we're going to look at one of the greatest melodic composers of the Classical era, and that would, of course, be Mozart. Now, as I hinted towards earlier, when you move further and further back in time, the pedaling conversation honestly becomes more complicated, more nuanced for sure, and quite honestly, a lot more controversial. Mozart didn't have a pedal for the most part like we have today during his life. So there's that whole debate. How much should you pedal? If he really didn't pedal much. There's also the whole debate of, our ears typically want to upgrade Mozart to the Romantic era, and we are playing often on a modern piano and not a forte piano. So how much should we try to sound like a forte piano? Should we say the forte piano is a forte piano? We're going to play Mozart on the piano like it's a piano. It's a big debate. So I'm going to give you some things to grab onto, though. What people often do in these videos is they're too afraid to say anything, because whatever you say will be held against you in a court of law. Someone's going to comment and say, well, why would you say this? This person does this. Or have you ever read this book or looked at this treatise? Yes, there's a lot of sources. There's a lot of opinions. So I'm going to give you some advice for when you do want to pedal in Mozart. Is that cool? If you don't want to pedal ever in Mozart, that's fine. Don't ever pedal in Mozart. But if you do want to pedal in Mozart, here is some really good guidelines to go off of. So we're going to be looking at the middle movement of Mozart's Sonata in F major, K332. And to start out, I'm going to give you a similar advice to what I just now said. If you're going to pedal, you need to change once per chord, even more so than Chopin, even cleaner than Chopin. You can't pedal through chords in Mozart and go. It's just too much. You can't do that in Mozart. So that stays the same between the eras, okay? What is really different is often in Mozart, we're not okay with blurring the melody together like we were in Chopin. I told you in Chopin, it's totally fine to have. You might even do that, a long trill in Chopin, and blur those two notes together. They're steps, they're harsh, but it sounds fine. In Mozart, we tend to want to avoid that. I'm going to play a little bit of this the way I would pedal it. This is the good way first. I mean, my opinion of the good way. So what I'm not doing is I'm not just going and then I'm recognizing that this is not part of the chord. So when I go to the F, I'm going to change my pedal so you hear a clean F. Now, when I go down to the C, I was changing my pedal because Mozart technically writes a two-note slur there. But if you connected it, it wouldn't be as offensive because the F and the C both belong to the F major chord. Let me show you what I mean. This is pedaling the F and the C together. So I'm changing on the F but not the C. And here's breaking both of them. And both could be good, really depending on what you're trying to pull off. But the key here is that I'm not taking melodic notes that are a step apart, stuff like this, and just smooshing them all together. I'm going to play the same passage again like a total romantic composer, which won't quite work because it's not a romantic piece, but I'm going to pedal once per chord, regardless of what happens in the right hand. Now, I know there are some of you out there who are thinking, that sounded great. You should always play Mozart that way. And you're right, it's not offensive. It's not like when I made Chopin really choppy and it was just kind of gross. This sounds actually fine. Now, you Mozart addicts out there who want it cleaner might be saying, that sounds terrible. It sounds terrible because you know it's Mozart. It does sound fine, but I would be in the camp that would say, it sounds like romantic music, so you might as well not play it. That's kind of my personal opinion on this. If you're going to play Mozart so pedally, so it just sounds like romantic music, don't play Mozart. Just go find some romantic music. There's actually tons of romantic music out there for you. Just play that, and put the pedal down all you want, right? I like Mozart a little more clean. When I'm playing Mozart, I tend to keep it on the clean side, but I do pedal. I'm not such a purist where I don't put the pedal down at all. Maybe some of you are asking, what about scales and slow movements of Mozart? Would I actually not pedal on those? And I probably wouldn't. If I did, I would literally pedal every note of the right hand because it can add a little bit. This is advanced pedaling for you, but again, don't worry about if it's a little over your head, but basically you can add a little bit of sheen or a little bit of color to every note without it becoming blurred together. You literally change every note. But yeah, in general, I would not play a Mozart scale, even in a slow movement. It just doesn't sound much like Mozart. So I would either change a bunch. You can do a little legato sometimes in your left hand to help with the resonance if it sounds too naked to you. But yeah, in general, you really shouldn't be doing things like arpeggios and Mozart just going. Okay, we're now ready to take it back to Bach, and you have to take all the things that I said about Mozart being more complicated, more nuanced, more controversial, and like times it by 10, because Bach wrote for the harpsichord or the clavichord or the organ, and almost most certainly did not use a pedal for any of his pieces. Once again, if you are in the camp where you would never dream of putting your foot down in Bach for any reason, then this doesn't apply to you, because I'm going to talk about what you should do when you use pedal in Bach. I'm assuming that we're going to use some pedal in Bach. So if you're in the camp where you never would, then, you won't agree with me on this. However, I am in the camp that you should at least try to do Bach as much as you can with no pedal, because it will teach you so much about the piece that you won't understand if you just put your pedal down. You'll have a long note and you're like, well, how do I hold that? And you'll find a solution sometimes with your thumbs and working between the hands. And you'll be like, oh, maybe that's how he did it since he didn't have a pedal. Maybe you can't hold a bass note, then you realize that maybe you shouldn't have been holding the bass note in the first place, because it should have lifted, because it's not that long of a note and you shouldn't even hold it. So it just teaches you a lot about the style to not pedal. So for example, now let's say I took a more lyrical, melodic approach to this, where I just basically, that's code words for like a super slur approach to this, where everything is really, really connected. Really hard for me to go that far. I do like certain notes being connected, but I really like my lifts in Bach. That's way too connected for my taste. But let's say I did that. That was no pedal. I did not pedal that, and I could achieve that sound. In fact, the pedal would really get in your way. What often happens with pedal is maybe you start using it sparingly, and then as you start adding the voices, you start panicking, you start holding the pedal down once per chord or something, and it sounds atrocious. But when you do use a pedal, try to sneak it in. Get it in there for little like tone changes, little nuances, maybe little things you can't reach. But your audience shouldn't be sitting there going like, I like that pedal. I hear that pedal. That's all really blurry. It shouldn't be to that degree noticeable. You can change the tone with pedal, like. Now, are there ever sections in Bach where I would use like a big pedal once per chord or something? It's possible. Maybe the end of a line or something, you have one of the big Bach. arpeggiated things you do. Maybe the chromatic fantasy and fugue. I think I did use some for the. I don't know the exact note. I did use some there, but then in retrospect, I think I would have been happier if I just would have done more finger pedal. Finger pedal is the idea of gripping a note and not letting go after you played it to kind of give a pedally effect. That's not pedal. My fingers are just holding the notes, and Bach totally could have done that in his era. So that does happen. In fact, that is one of the ways you can do Bach's most famous piece that's often over pedaled, his Prelude in C major. In fact, there have been times that I played that piece for people and said, hey, don't do pedal. Like, I'm not doing pedal. And they say, but you are doing pedal. I can hear it. I don't know how good it's going to sound through the microphone for the video, but it kind of sounds like I'm doing pedal. All I'm doing is gripping my left hand, literally what Bach tells you to do. Not letting that go. Then the right hand, I'm playing legato. But I'm not holding too much, but I'm getting a little bit of that pedal effect with the left hand. There are exceptions, but before you go for an exception, first see if you can use finger pedal to solve your problem and avoid the pedal if possible. But there is an art and kind of a nuance to gain a little bit more of that warm piano sound with the pedal down without just turning it into romantic music. And that's what you want to avoid. You just don't want to make Bach or Mozart, again, like I said earlier, into a romantic piece. Now, I didn't talk about the 20th or 21st centuries kind of on purpose. Typically, those composers are really specific what they want you to do. So you can just look at the individual piece and kind of glean from that what you think you should do. So it's a little easier to make those decisions now than in past eras before they had recorded sounds, when composers often didn't notate in the score what they wanted you to do because often they didn't even have a pedal to use themselves. Thanks for hanging out for a little bit. Really hope you learned a few things about pedaling in classical music. Let me know down below if you have any comments. I'll see you guys in the next video.